Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So as you can tell, I'm still kind of sick, and I'm really sorry that I sound like this, but believe it or not, I do sound better than I did the other day. That also explains why my bed is kind of a mess and why I don't have pillowcases on my pillows, because I'm washing all of my bedding because I thought that maybe that would help get rid of some of the sick that's lingering in my room. So because I didn't feel well yesterday, I didn't post a video, and so I was trying to figure out like what kind of video I could do today to make it easier on myself and not have to do a bunch of editing or anything like that. So I thought we would do another ASMR book reading. So I was gonna keep reading the Jerry Seinfeld one, but I actually can't read that because I forgot that it's copyrighted. So if anyone from his team sees that I read that, I could potentially have to take that video down and maybe get into a little bit of trouble, but hopefully that doesn't happen. So if you're part of his team, please know that I was just reading it for views and stuff. I wasn't doing anything malicious. Sorry. Anyways, so I was looking for books that are no longer copyrighted, and one of them that I actually own is The Age of Innocence. I got this one because it was mentioned in Gossip Girl, and then later I saw it at a bookstore. So I thought I would just buy it because of that. So that's what we're going to be reading today. I think we will start with the introduction because it is quite lengthy. So after we're done with the introduction, then we'll jump into the actual story of the book. I don't know, does everybody read the introduction? I do, or like the prologue. I read that too, but I don't know like if you necessarily need to. Alright, so anyways, we are just going to jump right into The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Oh, I look so rough, man. Alright, so the introduction. Edith Wharton is much and vaguely associated with Old New York, but it was, in fact, only in the wake of the First World War that the New York society she had been born into and in which she had passed her adolescence and early married years became, in her view, Old New York. The Age of Innocence, finished in 1920, is her reminiscent and shrewdly ambivalent survey of her own Old New York, and it is a novel in which perspective, the long gaze backward across the ruins of time, is everything. It is certainly one of the very best of her many novels. It is one of the few really first-class works of fiction to win the Pulitzer Prize, as it did in 1921, and it ushered in the last period of her literary career, during which she was at her best indeed only when meditating the vanished social era. The four novellas collected in 1924 under the title Old New York, the tranquilly beautiful fragment called The Buccaneers, published posthumously in 1938 and dealing with the first invasion by the young ladies from New York of the British aristocracy. It's one of those words that when I see it, I can't say it. Short stories like After Holbein and Roman Fever, these are the finest products of those uneven years, and each of them, like The Age of Innocence, constitutes in its way a backwards glance, to employ the Whitmanian phrase she used for her revealing and reticent memoirs of 1934. Mrs. Wharton remarked to her sister-in-law in 1921 during discussions about a possible dramatization of The Age of Innocence. It was, this is a little side note, it was finally successfully produced in 1927 with Catherine Cornell playing the part of Ellen Oleneska. Anyways, so dramatization. See, another word, when I see it, I can't read it. Of the Age of Innocence, that she knew everything about the world of the novel, and went on to prove it by severe and detailed instructions relating to the accuracy in the stage handling of social habits and rituals, manners of speech and of dress, the gardenia in the lapel, the proper time for after-dinner calls, and the proper liquids to serve the guests. The Age of Innocence is further testimony to Edith Wharton's remarkably fresh and abundant memory of upper middle-class New York society, both the truly old and established hierarchy to which the Jones family belonged, and the in-pushing new breed led, among others, by Mrs. William Backhouse Astor in the late 1870s and early 80s. Those were the years when Edith Jones made her social debut, became engaged, and then had to break the engagement off, and finally married Edward Robbins Wharton of Boston and made a partial escape from the social world that had nourished and stifled her, and perhaps in some ways would have wounded her. There are, first of all, in the novel, the physical setting she could still so vividly recall. There is New York itself, with its interminable brownstones, and its rival opera houses, its Gramercy Park and Washington Square and Central Park, its new Metropolitan Museum, its vast Pennsylvania terminus located in New Jersey and reached by ferry, all that cramped horizontal gridiron of a town without towers. Oh my gosh, there's so many words in this book that I don't know. Porticos, fountains, or perspectives. My ring light just shut off. Oh well. As she would describe it in A Backwards Glance. Hidebound in its deadly uniformity of mean ugliness, and yet containing it in something to be cherished, something to be affectionately re-explored in memory. And there's Newport, the summer extension of New York, and its Bellevue Avenue and Ocean Drive, along which the Victorias and Baroches would parade every afternoon, its archery contests and horse shows and tennis parties, its watering place banalities? I don't know. But more important, there are the people and their styles of conduct. To an almost discerning degree, the characters in the crowded cast of The Age of Innocence are drawn, in part and by adroit imaginative selection and combination, from individuals Mrs. Wharton had known and who had figured peripherally or centrally in her personal life 35 and 40 years earlier. One could indeed compile a sort of checklist of real-life sources, for the novel is riddled with what can only be called in-jokes, immediately recognizable when the book appeared by survivors of the period. Let me mention a few of the more visible ones. In the fleetingly seen cleric, the Reverend Dr. Ashmore of St. Matthew's, for example, one makes out the Reverend Dr. Washburn of Calvary, the father of Edith Wharton's closest girlfriend. One second. Okay. Near the center of the book's action, the scandalous marital and financial misbehavior of Julius Buford rehearses the very similar career of Miss Jones' first cousin, George Alfred Jones. There is something of Lucreta Stevens Jones, Edith Wharton's mother, and Mrs. Welland, in her talent for ignoring the unpleasant and her firm, placid features to which a lifelong mastery over trifles had given an air of fictitious authority. A photograph of Miss Jones with her 3 children taken around 1882 shows exactly that firm, dull, authoritative placidity. Again, another word I can say when I don't see it. And the physical grace at archery, if by no means the character of May Welland revives a memory of the Joneses' attractive Newport neighbor, Margaret Rutherford, who became the wife of this distinguished diplomat, Henry White. The complex profile of a rather formidable woman who had at one time played a most important role in Edith Wharton's young life is skillfully distributed. Meanwhile, between Mrs. Catherine Spicer McGough, the lordly and humane champion of Countess Countess Oleneska and Mrs. Lemuel Struthers, widow of the shoe-polish king. The novel regards the former with amused respect and the latter with tolerant derision, and some such mixture of feelings perhaps best expressed Mrs. Wharton's attitude after several decades and a world war toward an entire group of people upon whom I'm sorry, I'm sure that did not sound good. Toward an entire group of people upon whom her domestic and social future had briefly rested. For the fact is that The Age of Innocence goes back for its characters and essential situation and dramatic form to a particular chapter in the life story of Edith Wharton, to the time of her eventually broken engagement to a young man named Harry Stevens. And approached in this biographical manner, the novel can be seen as an act on Mrs. Wharton's part of retrospective self-confrontation. How much more of this do we have, man? Do we just, jump into it? Because the beginning is pretty boring. I think we will. So we'll read to page 11, I think, and we're starting on 3. 1 second. I'm sorry. All this reading and then having to suck air in is really killing my throat. It's just making it tickle so bad. Okay. On a January evening of the early 70s, Christine Nielsen was singing in Faust at the Academy of Music in New York. Though there was already talk of the erection in remote metropolitan distances above the 40s of a new opera house, which should compete in costliness and splendor with those of the great European capitals, and the world of fashion was still content to reassemble every winter in the shabby red and gold boxes of the sociable old academy. Conservatives cherished it for being small and inconvenient, and thus keeping out the new people whom New York was beginning to dread and yet be drawn to, and the sentimental clung to it for its historic associations and the musical for its excellent acoustics, always so problematic in quality in halls built for the hearing of music. It was Madame Nilsson's first appearance that winter, and what the daily press had already learned to describe as an exceptionally brilliant audience had gathered to hear her, transported through the slippery, snowy streets in private broughams, in the spacious family landau, or in the humbler but more convenient brown coupé. To come to the opera in a brown coupé was almost as honorable a way of arriving as in one's own carriage, and departure by the same means had the immense advantage of enabling one, with a playful allusion to the democratic principles, to scramble into the first brown conveyance in the line, instead of waiting till the cold and gin congested nose of one's own coachman gleamed under the portico of the academy. It was one of the great livery stableman's most masterly intuitions to have discovered that Americans want to get away from the amusement even more quickly than they want to get to it. When Newland Archer opened the door at the back of the club box the curtain had just gone up on the garden scene. There was no reason why the young man should not have come earlier, for he had dined at 7 alone with his mother and sister, and had lingered afterward over a cigar in the Gothic library with glazed black walnut bookcases and final-topped chairs, which was the only room in the house where Mrs. Archer allowed smoking. But in the first place, New York was a metropolis, and perfectly aware that in metropolises it was not the thing to arrive early at the opera, and what was or was not the thing played a part as important in Newland Archer's New York as the inscrutable totem terrors that had ruled the destinies of his forefathers thousands of years ago. The second reason for his delay was a personal one. He had dawdled over his cigar because he was at heart a he was a dilettante, and thinking over a pleasure to come often gave him a subtler satisfaction than its realization. This was especially the case when the pleasure was a delicate one, as his pleasures mostly were, and on this occasion the moment he looked forward to was so rare and exquisite in quality that, well, if he had just timed his arrival in accord with the prima donna's stage manager, he could not have entered the academy at a more significant moment than just as she was singing, "He loves me not, he loves me," and sprinkling the falling daisy petals with notes as clear as dew. She sang, "Of course, Mama," and not "he loves me," since in an unalterable and unquestioned law of the musical world required that the German text of French operas sung by Swedish artists should be translated into Italian for the clear understanding of English-speaking audiences. This seemed as natural to Newland Archer as all the other conventions on which his life was molded. Such as the duty of using 2 silver-backed brushes with his monogram in blue enamel to part his hair, and of never appearing in society without a flower, preferably a gardenia, in his buttonhole. "Mama, non, Mama," the prima donna sang, and "Mama," with a final burst of love triumphant, as she pressed the deceitful daisy to her lips and lifted her large eyes to the sophisticated countenance of the little brown Faust Capoul, who was vainly typing in a tight purple velvet doublet and plumed cap to look as pure and true as his artless victim. Newland Archer, leaning against the wall at the back of the club box, turned his eyes from the stage and scanned the opposite side of the house. Directly facing him was the box of old Mrs. Manson Mingott, whose monstrous obesity had long since made it impossible for her to attend the opera, but who was always represented on fashionable nights by some of the younger members of the family. On this occasion, the front of the box was filled by her daughter-in-law, Mrs. Lovell Mingot, and her daughter, I'm going to say Mingot, I think that's how it's pronounced, and her daughter, Mrs. Welland, and slightly withdrawn behind those brocaded matrons sat a young girl in white, with eyes ecstatically fixed on the stage lovers. As Madame Nielsen's mamma thrilled out above the silent house, the boxes always stopped talking during the daisy song. A warm pink mounted to the girl's cheek, mantled her brow to the roots of her fair braids, and suffused the young slope of her breast to the line where it met a modest tulle tucker fastened with a single gardenia. She dropped her eyes to the immense bouquet of lilies of the valley on her knee, and Newland Archer saw her white-gloved fingertips touch the flowers softly. He drew a breath of satisfied vanity, and his eyes returned to the stage. This is a difficult to follow book, guys. I'm sorry, I know I sound really gross from being sick, but I cannot help it. No expense had been spared on the setting, which was now acknowledged to be very beautiful even by people who shared his acquaintance with the opera houses of Paris and Vienna. The foreground to the footlights was covered with emerald green cloth. In the middle of the distance, symmetrical mounds of woolly green moss, bounded by crochet hoops, formed the base of shrubs shaped like orange trees, but studded with large pink and red roses. Gigantic pansies, considerably larger than the roses and closely resembling the floral pen wipers made by female Parishioners for fashionable clergymen sprang from the moss beneath the rose trees, and here and there a daisy grafted on a rose branch flowered with the luxuriance prophetic of Mr. Luther's Burbank's far-off prodigies. And unfortunately, it is getting too difficult for me to keep reading, so that's going to be where I stop the video today. I know this wasn't super fantastic, but I felt bad for missing yesterday's video, so this is what we get today. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was kind of enjoyable for you, and let me know down below if you want me to keep doing this. I promise my voice won't always sound like this. Hopefully I'll be better tomorrow. But yeah, we'll just keep reading from this book, and I'll pick it up right where we leave off in the video before it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and be sure to come back for another video. Bye!